let's talk a little bit about some of the new developments about how the midterms might shake out as we, now had this leaked draft decision. Looks like Supreme Court set to overturn Roe versus Wade. Dramatic reordering of American politics and upending of a precedent that has been in place for nearly 50 years. So part of what will determine how this goes politically is ultimately how Republicans will respond. And there was a thought that they would just focus on the leak and kind of try not to talk about any of this stuff. And the Republican, Republican Senatorial Committee put out talking points saying, we're not extremists, we're the mainstream ones, the Democrats are the extremists. But we've got already a number of instances where you can see how this decision makes the politics very uncomfortable for Republicans. Now they're getting asked questions about abortion that they really don't want to have to engage with.
Which their base wants and which they do not want to have to engage with.
Exactly. So they either have to extremely piss off their base, extremely piss off their base, or, so they're damned if they do, they damned if they don't. If they try to moderate their positions on abortion to be somewhat in the mainstream of American their base is going to freak out. And if they go along with their base, the rest of the country's like, what the hell? What? That's what you support? That's insane. So one of the first pieces here is Mitch McConnell. Go ahead and throw this tear sheet up on the screen. So he is outright saying that a national federal abortion ban is, in fact, possible. Because some of the talking points we've heard is why don't you just leave it to the states? And if you don't like the regulations in Mississippi, then you can move somewhere else, putting aside how classist that is and how people don't want to move from their homes, et cetera. That is one argument that's been made. And also, listen, if you're in California and you're in New York, that this decision won't affect you that much. Well, now you have Mitch McConnell saying, actually, we're kind of serious about this federal ban. And we had reported last week about how anti-abortion groups, along with some of their closest allies, they've been plotting this for a while now. They've been sort of putting the pieces together. And there's going to be a lot of pressure from the base to basically put up or shut up. All right, now you got your way with Roe versus Wade. This is the next step. You guys said that you're with us. Are you actually going to do it? Let me read to you what McConnell actually said, and then we'll get your reaction, Saagar. So he said, if the leaked opinion became the final opinion, legislative bodies, not only at the state level, but at the federal level, certainly could legislate in that area, and said that a national abortion ban is, quote, worthy of debate. He goes on to say, and if this were the final decision, talking about the leaked draft, that was the point that it should be resolved one way or another in the legislative process. So yes, it's possible. Those are his words. He also says, with regard to the abortion issue, I think it's pretty clear where Senate Republicans stand, basically saying, yes, we're very pro-life. And if and when the court makes a final decision, I expect everybody will be more definitive, but I don't think it's much secret where Senator Republicans stand on that issue.
So obviously, when he says worthy of debate, that's a very carefully chosen word, because my prediction on this is they're going to hide by the filibuster. Now, because they've already come out and said we're not going to nuke the filibuster in order to have a national ban on abortion. But they may actually find themselves in a very tough position because, per David Shor's analysis, if Trump wins roughly the same amount of vote that he did back in 2020 with maybe, plus 0.2 or 0.3%, you could have a situation where you have a filibuster-proof majority of Republicans in the Senate and Donald Trump in the White House in 2024. Then I just see it. I honestly think a ban really could happen under that, because I don't see how a single one of these people could go back to their base constituents who are overwhelmingly pro-life. I want to emphasize they are, out of step with the rest of the American public, but, that doesn't necessarily matter on some of these things. So it's a serious problem for the Republicans if they may actually, what was the expression you used? Dog that caught the car?
Dog that caught the car.
Yeah, no, it's very true though.
Yeah.
I really do think they're in that situation. And now you're seeing this on the state level. And the reason why I found this clip so significant and we both wanted to play it was because this is going to be the meta-narrative going into the 2022 midterm elections. Now look, Who knows how it plays out? I still think the Republicans are, set to win a majority, but it could affect things on the margins. And, our general thesis on culture war issues is that whichever side seems the most extreme on the day of the election, they're the ones who are going to suffer at the ballot box. Personally, I think that's been the Democrats probably for the last 10 years or so. But with the return to abortion politics and the drop of gender ideology, defund the police, and critical race theory, and this to prominence, this puts Republicans on the more extreme side of the issue, and this is a perfect example of a Mississippi governor here being pressed on CNN about an actual abortion ban in that state, which will then come to nationalized politics as many other state bans and state laws have, just like the Florida legislation. So let's take a listen to what that said.
The state of Mississippi will force girls and women who are the victims of incest to carry those childs to term. Can you explain why that is going to be your law?
Well, that's going to be the law because in 2007, the Mississippi legislature passed it. I will tell you, Jake, and this sort of speaks to how far the Democrats in Washington have come on this issue. But in 2007, when the trigger law was put in place, we had a Democrat Speaker of the House, and we had a Democrat Chairman of the Public Health Committee in the Mississippi House of Representatives.
But why are you
going to particular piece of legislation?
Why is it acceptable in your state to force girls who are victims of incest to carry those children to term?
Well, as you know, Jake, over 92% of all abortions in America are elective procedures. When you look at the number of those that actually are involved in incest, it's less than 1%. And if we need to have that conversation in the future about potential exceptions in the trigger law, we can certainly do that. But the reality is that, again, that affects less than 1% of all abortions in America on an annual basis.
Okay, but that is going to be the law of Mississippi. Let me ask you, what about a fetus that has serious or fatal abnormalities that will not allow that fetus to live outside the womb? Is the state of Mississippi going to force those girls and women who have this tragedy inside them to carry the child to term? Are you going to force them to do that?
Well, Jake, I'll tell you, I think that these questions illustrate exactly what we've been talking about, and that is you're dealing in examples that are rare and are a very small percentage of the overall abortions. And the reason for that is because when you talk to Americans, regardless of what the polling says with respect to overturning Roe v. Wade, the vast majority of Americans recognize that the abortion laws in America right now, that is what are extreme.
Yeah, so this is what I'm saying. This is going to be dominating the conversation for months and months to come.
2 weeks ago, he does an interview with Jake Tapper. This does not come up.
Nobody cares. We're still talking about Florida.
Now you're having to defend a law that requires a teenage girl raped by her stepfather to carry that pregnancy to term.
Exactly. And everybody's like, oh, well, that's a fringe exception. It's like, yeah, well, it can still dominate the thing. I was actually thinking back to, when's the last time that the Republican, or this type of culture war was on the national stage? So pre-gay marriage, obviously, Obergefell happened. But Terry Schiavo, do you remember that case?
Yeah.
It was, what was that, 2005? So I was young when it was happening. I've read a little bit about it, but that dominated the national conversation. It was a single person, I forget even which state that this all actually I think it was Florida. I think it was Florida. But anyway, that just shows you that those types of cases can dominate the national conversation. So do not, many people, Republicans are saying, oh yeah, it might happen in Mississippi, Alabama. It's not going to affect the team nationally. Well, I mean, we all just saw how Republicans are gaining ground on the Florida legislation, and that's just Florida. Well, now Mississippi, Alabama, various southern states are all going to have to ask this question.
Well, and Mitch McConnell saying, we might do it at the federal level. We might
have to do it, keeping the door open. So the debate, the meta-narrative is shifting against Republicans on this ground. Like I said, I have no idea how this is going to shake out. But all I know is that the more these types of headlines are out there, let's put this up there on the screen, the worse it is going to be for the GOP. People can try and claim that people don't care. And look, maybe people don't care about the overturn of Roe versus Wade, but I'm going to venture to say that the majority of the American population, which is generally pro-choice and, at least up until 15 weeks of pregnancy, when they look at stuff like this, there's a bill, classifying abortion as homicide, advanced by Louisiana lawmakers. lawmakers, to be clear, it is not law. To be clear, I don't know if the governor would sign it, all the caveats, etc. Even having this within the realm of debate, just like defund the police was within the realm of debate for the Democrats, is going to dominate the meta conversation around the party and have real tough questions, right? Because, frankly, I think that the pro-life base of the Republican Party is even stronger than the defund the police but base of the Democratic Party.
There's zero
right?
doubt about that.
So it makes it even harder to go against it whenever you're a GOP politician.
Disorganized.
Well, there you go.
They're not. Listen, Joe Biden is perfectly comfortable. Think about this difference. Joe Biden is perfectly comfortable in response to a call to defund the police to put out an op-ed that's like, screw you, we're going to fund the police.
That's a good point, actually. And
is Mitch McConnell?
No realm of
Mitch McConnell is not able to do that whatsoever. Is Trump going to stand? No, of course not. Of course not. He owes his entire political campaign to this very well-organized part of the base. And by the way, we're going to speak to some of the polling in just a minute. I looked it up. Defund the police, whatever you think about it, is definitely not popular as a slogan. Requiring a woman who's been raped to carry her baby to term is less popular than defund the police.
Wow. Yeah.
So those are the types of, that's how far out you are in terms of extremist position. And I also think it's really important to understand that when you're talking about the overturn of Roe, you are inherently talking about these early pregnancy bans, because already under Roe, states can ban third trimester abortion. Mm-hmm. They can do whatever they want after the point of viability. So you're only talking about these early stage pregnancies where, yes, if you have an outright ban after 6 weeks, if you have these fetal heartbeat bans, if you have, bans without any sort of exceptions for rape and incest or life and health of the mother or life and health of the baby itself, you are talking about positions that are very much out of step with the mainstream of America. So, listen, again, I always want to restate, I still think overall the midterm landscape is much more favorable to Republicans. There is no question the number one issue on people's minds when they vote, as it typically is going to be the economy. There is no doubt that even though we actually just got a very strong jobs report, inflation is killing people, gas prices are killing people.
Wages are not outpacing inflation.
That's exactly right.
Story. Yeah,
people are getting a pay cut every single week, every single month, every single year because of inflation outpacing any sort of wage gains. That will be the primary issue that defines this election, not to mention, the historic trends of party in power typically does poorly because their base is kind of apathetic. The opposition is much more motivated. I don't think any of this changes that overall picture, but does it make things a lot more difficult for Republicans on the margins? Yes. Are you going to have specific examples where some Republican candidate goes out and pulls like a Todd Aiken, opining about legitimate rape or whatever it is that falls out of the... Yeah, you could have those sorts of situations too that puts seats out of play for Republicans that otherwise would have been in.
Well, that's just like Democrat. You'll find some fringe Democrat politician who's like, we're going to defund the police, like we're going to, whatever, remake society, whatever, cultural Marxism. That always gets a huge amount of play in the right and, on social media. Well, now you have a flip of the dynamic. So I would just, look, we see how it works against the left. Now you can also see how it works against the right.
And it is a much more organized and more established strain in the Republican base, because as Mitch McConnell said, like every single senator is pro-life.
Yeah, on the record.
Now, do they? Let me take that back. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski claim to be pro-choice.
Right, they're pro-Roe, right? I never know how to parse these politics.
Yes, exactly. I mean, they try to kind of play both sides, but they, would they go along with complete bans and no exceptions for rape and incest and those sorts of, I don't think they would be on board with that. But the overwhelming majority of the Republican caucus is on board with things like this, would support a federal ban on abortion. So, defund, again, whatever you think about it, and I personally do think that police departments, clearly we've been funding them and militarizing them and it has not helped in terms of crime, but whatever you think of the policy, there are very few representatives in Congress and none in the Senate who have embraced this rhetoric. it is coming, directly from the activist base. So this is a much more widespread sentiment that is very much out of step with where the American people broadly are on the issues.
I think that's right.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.